The wind carried with it the lonely sound of the prairie, whispering through dry grasses that bent under the fading light of the setting sun. And in that golden twilight, she knelt on the ground, her dress dusted with earth, her hands trembling as they pressed into the soil of 3 fresh graves. Her auburn hair fell in disheveled waves around her tear-streaked face, catching the glow of the horizon as if it carried all the fire of her sorrow. And the wooden crosses standing solemn before her seemed to pierce the very sky with silent mourning. She whispered names that no longer answered, spoke prayers that dissolved into sobs, and in that desolate moment she felt utterly forsaken, as though the world itself had turned cold and cruel. The sickness that had swept through her family had left her with nothing but shadows, and though the land stretched wide in every direction, she had never felt so trapped, so painfully alone. But then, in the distance, came the rhythmic thud of hooves against dry earth, a sound steady and strong, cutting through her despair like the promise of something unseen. A cowboy appeared against the fading sun, tall in the saddle, his frame outlined by the last colors of day. And though he could have passed by, though he could have kept riding as so many men do, something in the sight of her crumpled form by those graves pulled him to stop. He dismounted with a quiet grace, removing his hat as he walked closer, his boots pressing gently into the soil, as though he respected the sacredness of her grief. He did not rush her with questions nor offer hollow words. He simply stood near, hat in hand, his eyes filled with a kind of steady sorrow that told her he too had known loss. When she finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying, she saw not just a man, but a shelter in human form. Someone who might hold back the storm that threatened to drown her heart. He knelt beside her, his presence grounding her like the earth itself, and his voice, low and steady, broke the silence with words that seemed to fall into her soul. "You don't have to go through this alone." She wanted to believe him, but her heart was fragile, splintered by the cruel weight of loss. And so she told him her story in broken fragments, the fever that swept her home, the last breaths of the people she loved most, the silence that followed, and the emptiness of a house that no longer felt like home. Her voice cracked as she admitted she had no place left to go, no arms to fall into, no roof to protect her from the harshness of a world that had taken everything. The cowboy listened, every word etching itself into his heart. And when she could speak no more, he laid his hand gently over hers, rough from labor yet tender in its strength, and gave her the only promise that mattered: "Then I'll be your shelter." True to his word, he set himself to work the very next day. With strong hands and quiet determination, he began building a cabin on a patch of land not far from where her family rested, so she could still visit those graves, yet not be consumed by them. Every morning he rose before the sun, chopping wood, hauling stone, shaping beams. And every evening he worked until the stars emerged, their light reflecting in his steady eyes as he hammered and carved, sweat dripping from his brow. She watched from a distance at first, still lost in her sorrow. But little by little she began to help, passing him nails, holding boards steady, sweeping the sawdust from their work. Together they built not just a house, but a foundation for something greater, something her heart had thought was lost forever. When the walls rose, she ran her hand along the wood, feeling the warmth of what was being created. And though tears still found her in the quiet of night, there was now the sound of his voice near the fire, reminding her she was not alone. He told her stories of the road, of wild horses and starry nights, of friends lost and lessons learned. And in turn, she shared memories of laughter around her old family table, of songs sung at dusk, of the dreams she once had as a girl. Slowly, her broken spirit found pieces of itself again, and with every board nailed into place, every seed planted in the soil near the cabin, she began to believe in the possibility of life after loss. The cowboy did not seek to erase her grief, for he knew that would be impossible. Instead, he stood beside it, strong and steady, building her a world where grief could exist but not consume, where memories could be honored without breaking her. On the day the cabin was finished, he handed her the key he had carved himself from wood. pressing it into her palm with a smile that held more than words could ever say. She stepped inside, the scent of fresh timber mingling with the warm fire crackling in the hearth. And for the first time since her family had been laid to rest, she felt the weight on her chest lift just enough for her to breathe. She turned to him, tears shimmering in her eyes, and whispered, "I thought I'd never belong anywhere again." His answer was simple, spoken in that calm, steady way of his. "You belong here. With me, always." Seasons changed, and with them so did their lives. They planted a garden, coaxing green shoots from the stubborn soil, and built a barn to house animals that soon filled the air with the sounds of life. She laughed again, the sound like music in the quiet prairie evenings, and he cherished every note of it as if it were the most precious treasure he had ever known. There were moments of hardship, of storms that threatened their crops, of long winters that tested their resolve. But never again did she face those trials alone, for the cowboy stood with her through it all, his strength unwavering, his love constant. And in time, when she stood once more before those 3 wooden crosses, she no longer collapsed beneath the weight of grief, but instead whispered with gratitude, "I'm not alone anymore." For though her family rested beneath the earth, she had found a new one, forged in resilience and love. Their story was not one of sudden miracles or easy roads, but of courage, of 2 souls choosing each other against the backdrop of loss and loneliness, building not just a house but a sanctuary, not just a future but a promise that no matter what storms came, they would weather them together. It was a story of love reborn from sorrow, of hope carved from hardship, and of a cowboy who found a broken woman by 3 fresh graves and gave her not only shelter but the certainty that she would never again face the world on her own. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even in the darkest chapters of life, there is always the chance to build something new, to find strength, to rediscover love where you thought it lost, then let this not be the end of your journey here. Subscribe to this channel, because every tale we share carries a spark of hope, resilience, and love that might be exactly the light you need in your own darkest hours. And by joining us, you ensure you'll never miss another story that could change the way you see the world.